Hi everyone, this is Essen Raza from C21 Innovative Realty, and today I have a special guest on the show, real estate lawyer from Naqvi Law, Nabeel Naqvi. Hi Nabeel, how are you?
Good, Aston. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And Nabeel is a real estate lawyer, and he's been working a lot on buyer and seller deals. And I want to bring him on the show today to basically discuss and talk about how the current pandemic is impacting buyers and sellers in today's world. For those buyers and sellers that have closings coming up, what can they expect? We're going to talk about how Nabeel's work has changed for buyers and sellers. If you're looking for closings, what are you going to be doing? Are you going to be meeting with the lawyers or meeting them virtually? We'll also get into some other stuff as well. But I guess the first question, which I'm getting a lot from my clients, and I'm sure you are as well, is if you're a buyer and seller and you have completed a transaction or did a deal and you have a closing coming up in the next month or 2 months, the number one question I'm getting is that, are they going to close? And if they do, are they going to close on time? What are some things that you would recommend or advise to the buyers and sellers in today's market right now?
Yeah, that great question, and that is the main question that I'm getting. That's on the top of everyone's mind. Forget about the market moving forward, but the deals that have already been signed. What is going to happen to those? So there's two perspectives here. Obviously, there's the buyer's perspective and the seller's perspective. Both the buyer and the seller, however, are governed by the agreement that they have signed. As we were talking about before the call, uh, this comes down to the contract that you sign with the other party. So all of the time frames, all of the default and breach terms are in that agreement under what's called an entire agreement clause. So obviously, everything in terms of the relationship between the parties is going to be governed by that agreement. So what does that mean for the pandemic? So now there's this pandemic that's going on outside of this agreement that is affecting these closings. The long story short is that the law depends on precedents. And the one thing that we keep hearing is that this thing is unprecedented. So we don't actually have any legal precedents or legal cases of pandemics affecting real estate contracts that we can go back to and point and say, oh, well, this is what happened in this case. This is similar to this, and therefore, you have to close a deal or you don't have to close a deal. So there are no general principles of law with pandemics and contracts. So we have to go back to our first principles of contracts, which govern the agreement. And you have to say, what does the agreement say? So number one is time is of the essence. Every agreement says time is of the essence. That means that the time frames are in the contract and you have to adhere to those. So if you don't adhere to that time frame, you're in breach. As I mentioned, there's no law out there that says your obligations under your private agreements with other private parties are suspended during a pandemic. So even though the government may have suspended time limits, or the government said that you don't have to do this for 30 days or you don't have to do that, that doesn't apply between two private individuals who have entered into a contract. And so something like a force majeure clause would not be applicable here, A, because it's not in your agreement, and B, that applies more to leases and construction contracts. So then the other option you have is a frustration of contract argument. You can go to court and say, well, I wasn't able to perform the contract because of the coronavirus, and it wasn't my fault, and this was completely unforeseen, and it was impossible for me to, for example, buy the house or to sell the house because I couldn't go anywhere. So number one, um, before you even make that argument, you have to make sure you're not in default already. So assuming that's not an issue, what the courts have said that when you're making an argument like this, delays, so the fact that you're delayed now and you want to cancel a contract, that doesn't apply. Loss of mortgage commitment. So a lot of mortgages and banks are backing out of deals if you tell them that you lost your job, or lenders might just be backing out just because of the given situation, and they have that option under the commitment. They can back out anytime. That does not qualify as a frustration of contract. That would not in court get you out of your agreement. A drop in your investment portfolio. I lost $1 million in the stock market yesterday. I can't buy this house anymore. That the money was going to come from there. Um, so that argument doesn't apply. And you have to really, it's difficult, but you have to put yourself in the other party's situation. Let's say you're a buyer, you can't close, but you also have a sale transaction. So when you're on your sale, you're not going to be like, oh well, Mr. Buyer, you can go away, don't worry, the pandemic's going on. No, you're going to want that sale to be completed, just like how the seller on the property you're buying wants it to be completed. So your obligation remains to act reasonably and in good faith. And the best thing that I can advise in this situation is, where you know that your deal is not going to close as a buyer or the seller or the agent, is start communicating that. Communicate it early. It might not change much, but there's no point of hiding your head in the sand. You have to communicate with your lawyer first, with your agent first, and then those professionals will go and then try to negotiate either an extension on your purchase or negotiate a reduction in purchase price. Both things are problematic. As in, if your clients do want to, negotiate an extension, make sure it's very clear what the parties want, and that goes into the agreement. Avoid vague terms like, oh, this agreement is extended now until the coronavirus is over, like that doesn't help. So put a fixed time limit on it, and then you can always revisit it if you have to. So these are some of the pointers that I would give, is to come to some agreement in writing. Make sure you paper it, and try to be reasonable. Hardline stances, courts never take well to hardline stances on either side. So if you come to court after this is all over and say, well, I didn't close, I told the guy the coronavirus and I wasn't going to close, there's no way. Courts don't like that. At the same time, if you're adhering to a strict contract without being reasonable at all, there is still some requirement to act in good faith in contracts. So in both situations, it's better to think long term, and think about trying to reach a mutual resolution. So I hope I answered your question. If you have any follow-up on that, I'm pleased to take that.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you stressed on, and which I'll stress on again, is if you are a buyer and seller out there,
Mhm.
important for you to communicate with the professionals, with the realtor, with the mortgage broker, with the lawyer. This is the time to communicate. And if you're a professional, I think it's your duty to also communicate with your clients, to keep them in the loop, and not, like you said, put their head in the sand and wait for things to happen. Just be aware, inform your clients as to what's going on, keep them prepared, and keep it professional. So I think communication is truly important now more than ever.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. My next question is just in terms of your business and the nature of how your work has been impacted. I know in the past, clients have come to your office to meet you personally, to sign documents. Obviously, some of you guys and yourself included are taking precautions. So what are you doing differently, and what can clients expect now when they are closing? How are they going to sign the documents?
Yes. So this is one thing that the Law Society was very proactive about. Almost immediately, they issued a directive to the lawyers saying that you are allowed to sign documents remotely. You can witness documents remotely. So some lawyers have programs set up where it's a complete virtual setup, like how you see this, and you'll have the documents in front of the screen. The lawyer can go through each document with you, and then you sign on your phone with your finger, and then that signature automatically appears on each signature line. It's different than DocuSign, where DocuSign you kind of just you sign once and then it inserts the signatures. This one, actually, each document requires a signature or initial,
Yeah.
and the program tracks where you are. So after the signing, you get a complete package of everything you signed, and it tells you where the document was signed, what device was used to sign, the IP address. So that's on the extreme one end, which we might be moving towards that. See, the thing is, with these things, once the cat's out of the bag, it's hard to get it back in. So
Yeah.
it'd be hard for them to come back after a year and say, oh, well, you're not allowed to, witness
Yeah.
documents remotely anymore.
Yeah.
The other option, which we've been doing a lot, is emailing the documents to the client. They print out the documents. They sign the documents in front of us through Skype or FaceTime or whatever the case is. We see them signing the documents. We make sure no one else is in there and providing any undue influence. and then they courier the documents back to our office. So that's one option. And if clients do still want to meet, we can meet because we are essential services. So
Yeah.
we'll just keep the physical distance as much as possible. But our office technically is open. We're just highly recommending everyone to just stay home and just sign from the comfort of their own home. Some lawyers are doing drive-in signs, so they'll drive to the client, um, they meet in the driveway, or they're doing hybrid meetings where they'll come to the office, but they'll be in a separate room and they're meeting virtually, even though they're in the same office. So there's a whole kind of myriad of options available to us. The main point is just to make sure that we know who's signing and to avoid fraud, basically. Yeah, that's it.
We have some time. I wanted to ask you about leases, commercial leases and residential leases. Obviously,
Yeah.
the government of Canada and Ontario have provided information about, rents and whether rent is payable or not. From your perspective, if you're in a contract and you're a tenant for a residential or even commercial, what are some of, I guess, the items you can take advantage of? What are some of the misconceptions out there that are going around? If you can kind of clarify that for tenants on both sides of commercial and residential.
Absolutely, yes. So I'll start with the commercial because there's a lot more information there. Residential, I'll come back to. Residential is basically the government said they're not evicting anyone. So take that for what you want it to mean. So we'll start with commercial. Commercial is, it's very challenging right now. So we have landlords and tenants who are both going through this frustrating time. Tenants, first of all, they wanted to know, well, do they have to continue to operate? Because as you know, some leases say, how you have to continue to stay open. That's part of their lease. But then the government came down and said, well, you have to close. So that kind of got sorted out pretty fast once it was pretty clear that it was a government directive to close. So you're not going to be in breach of your agreement just because you were forced to close down by the government. So then it immediately shifted to rent. Do I have to pay my rent? How do I pay my rent? I'm not even getting any money. How do I have to pay my workers, right? So most people are feeling the rent pinch, and it's the same thing. It comes down to communication. Do not, as a tenant, do not hide your head in the sand and run away. You have to communicate with your landlord and let them know that you're still willing to come to some type of reasonable resolution. So some landlords, Essen, have been very accommodating, and they pretty much allowed commercial tenants or residential tenants to defer their rent. But on the other hand, a lot of tenants have kind of just, sent letters or called their landlord and been like, I'm not paying. There's a pandemic. You're not getting any money. That's the end of the story. And so that's not right either, right? You can't be dictating terms because, again, the lease is what determines your obligations and rent. So you have to come to some sort of agreement. And what that means is you might come to an agreement. What I'm seeing is 2 or 3 months rent is deferred. Okay, let's get through this 2 or 3 month period, and then we'll come back and either extend that period or negotiate something else. And then so that takes care of the rent. And then some people still have to pay. So there's additional rent and base rent, as you know, right? So base rent might be deferred, but the landlord still has to pay their utilities, and they have to pay their workers to come onto the premises, and caretakers and janitors and stuff. So they're still incurring these costs. So they're saying, well, we still should be able to get that as well. So very very difficult, difficult for everybody. But the main thing is to get it in writing, get an agreement, paper it, at least a short term, something in the short term. And then you can come to a long-term agreement after we find out what's going on. Also look into insurance as a tenant and the landlord. There's business interruption insurance, and there's other types of insurances that might kick in to pay your rent in these situations. But you need to go through that policy with your, your insurance advisor, and see if there's any options there. But yeah, no easy answers, Asin, man. I mean, like, landlords are not getting rent, and tenants can't pay rent. And landlords need to know, well, do I want to keep tenant? Like, sometimes it's better to have a tenant than not have a tenant, right? Even though they're not paying rent. So yeah, just crazy times that we're in right now.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've learned from you is, there's no concrete answer, but it does require flexibility on both sides.
Yes, you have to think long
Cooperation.
term. You have to
Yeah,
think long term. If you're a landlord, you're like, oh, you're in default of your rent, get out. I mean, like, at the end of the day, this is gonna pass, and then,
yeah,
you maybe that tenant was the best tenant for you, and they're
yeah,
going through a rough time. So you
yeah.
have to be very careful there, and like, so basically,
And,
you have to come to an agreement. Yeah.
and I've seen like my own. I have clients of my own, commercial tenants who I have helped them find leases. Unfortunately, the landlords in some cases are, still ask them to pay the full rent, and there's no cooperation. And on the flip side, on the residential side, it's the same thing. But on the flip side, I've also seen cases in my clients where the landlords and tenants have been cooperating, and it's good to see that during these times there are still people that are willing to help each other out. And I think that's the best way that we're going to get through this is
Yeah.
cooperation, flexibility. Yeah, we're all going to take a hit in some form or the other, but if we can help each other out, then like you said, long term, it's only going to benefit everybody.
Yeah, and just quickly, I'll mention, in 2008, when things were similar, and things went bad and people couldn't make rent, the courts did come down harder on the landlords, the banks, the corporations,
Yeah,
as opposed to the smaller guys, right? Because they're
yeah,
like, well, you're in a position here to at least
yeah,
burden some of this. And if you're not going to, take your fair share, then the courts will come down harder on those. So that's something, as a tenant, you can go to your landlord, and maybe just negotiate with them in that sense, basically.
Okay. Thanks so much, Bill, for the information. And for anybody that wants to get in touch with Nabeel, you can reach him. We'll provide his contact information below in the post. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me as well if you have any questions. I wish you guys all the best. Safety, stay strong, everybody.
Stay
And
safe, stay home.
stay
Yeah.
home. Yeah, everyone stay home.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, Nabeel.
All right, take care.